Hello and a very warm welcome to Dr. Ahmed YouTube channel. Dear students, today I am on part 7 of the poem Reflection by Toufique Rafat. All the previous parts have been recorded already and available on my YouTube channel. Today we are starting with this part with the sense that when poetry is created, at that time two things can coexist and sometimes they cannot coexist. One is the inspiration that comes in the mind of the poet, or one can say that descends in him and he is able to utter out poetry. But on the other hand, there is technique also, there is craft also. These two things combine together sometime in order to make the perfect kind of poetry. The poet is putting a question in the very beginning: is it possible to make these two things exist together, or only one will exist and other will go out? For example, if inspiration is there, the technique may not be there. And if technique is there, the inspiration may not be there. Most of the time, this type of conflict happens in the mind of the poet, as Wordsworth has been explaining this situation in his poem Prelude. But let us see, what does Toufique Rafat say about this? He claims and continues by saying, as a novice, I let each poem proceed on its intense illogical way like a woman. He says, I don't consider myself a very expert poet or a very veteran type of poet. He says, I consider myself just a student, a person who is still learning to write poetry. That is why he says, I never stop to think about the perfection of the poem or the technicalities of the poem. Instead of that, he says, I just let the ideas come and ideas flow, convert themselves into the words in its intensity whenever the intense moment is there. At that time, he goes for that. As Wordsworth had said, that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So, this poet also says that when powerful feelings come, he lets them out, rather sometime in an illogical way, and compares it, interestingly enough, he compares it with like a woman, as the woman would do some of the things as she thinks better, or as her mind is saying, or as her inspiration is saying, he tries to do that. Possibly, the example is not to annoy the woman, the example is to reflect some of the qualities which make this word even beautiful word with the help of the woman. And that is why the poet is saying that he continues to let the feeling come out in the words just like a woman. And then he says, it means that possibility is that the inspiration can create poetry. But then the poet comes forward and says, no more shall such abandonment be suffered, or image engrafted for its thrill. The poet says that he is not going to stop at this moment and think about whether he should include the technicalities of the poem or he should build up the image in such a way as he is saying in the previous lines. He says he may be suffering from that, but he does not want to do so, and that is why he proceeds further and says, for an image should never be an oasis in a waste of words, but gently glow as a gulmahar glows. According to the poet should not stop in order to think that how his image will be glowing, will be fine, will be shining, will be adjusting inside the poem. Instead of that, and says that if he stays there thinking that the words are the barren desert and the image is the oasis, and possibly he may be stopping there for some time to take rest, he says he will not be doing this, but let the image glow in the same way as the gulmahar glows on the shisham trees. The shisham tree is mentioned in the very next line, as for example, the poet says, among the splendid everyday shisham in all the years of building. So, in that way, he says, and gives the very appropriate example. Rather, this part of the poem is filled up with very much appropriate examples because the poet says that image is coming into his mind and he's not going to stop in order to, invent certain techniques or to make it as beautiful as possible and thinking that it's an oasis in the words. No, he says he will let this image glow automatically, inspiringly, just in the same way as the beautiful Gulmohar flowers and the vine of Gulmohar grows among the beautiful shisham trees. This is his purpose. So, according to him, if the image is coming, if the inspiration is coming, let that inspiration be converted into poetry, into beautiful image, instead of thinking and stopping that technicalities should also come first of all. So, the natural way of inspiring the poet and getting inspired from nature and converting that inspiration into poetry poetry is being preferred by Toufique Rafat, also as it was preferred by Wordsworth in most of his poetry. He says that he has been spending a long time and compares it of making of poetry, writing of poem, compares it with some building. He says, as we need to lay brick after brick on making a building, it's a strong building to be built. Definitely, some methodology is to be adopted, and one of the methodology is that brick after brick it should be done instead of just piling up the bricks. So, this is one of the ways how the building is constructed, each in its proper place. Does the lyric sulk, impugn, or rebel? Similarly, possibly the poet is trying to say that some kind of methodology is also required to create poetry. It was okay to say that inspiration is more important, but then later on he comes to talk about some kind of technique, and for this purpose he uses the image, the example of making a building by putting the bricks one by one, and asks a question again. As he had started the poem with the same question, he puts the question that if this is done, what will happen? Will the lyric, will the poetry feel bad, will dispute, will rebel, will not be in your control, or will not be able to come out in a very smooth voice, rather stammering would take place, and ultimately the image would withdraw. He says if this technique is given preference, what will happen? Is it possible that the inspiration which is coming to you, that the image which you are constructing, that will withdraw? So perhaps the poet is saying that there is something which is very difficult to maintain, and that thing is to keep the technique and the image together. Because if you bring in the technique, the possibility is that the image would withdraw, and if you concentrate on the image, it may not be developing in the same way, though it will glow, but it will not be developing in the same way as a beautiful building is erected with the help of the technique or the kind of plan which is used for building the materials, and then converting them into building. It may not happen. So that is the question of the poet. He is asking it again and again, and then gives some answer. He says the risk is real, but it is time to leave the path in the wilderness. The poet says that if you want to create good poetry, do not feel bad on the risk. Let the risk come and leave yourself in the wilderness instead of stopping and thinking how the words should be arranged and thinking how the technique of writing poetry should be given preference. Stop it and just think about the image which is being constructed. Automatically, the words will come. So, leave that thing in the wilderness and seek with an adult purpose contentment in the formal garden. And in that way, just like the purpose of doing something great, writing great poetry, or admiring or appreciating some scene of nature, he says, continue to do that and live with the same kind of contentment in the formal garden of poetry. That means formality may also involve, but first of all, inspiration should be defined with the help of the words that should come forward, and later on, the possibility is there that the formalities may be created, and if the formalities even are less created, don't feel sad or bad, just remain contented with that. So, dear students, the whole poem is about the poetic inspiration which the poet is trying to say, but he is also explaining that some kind of technique of writing poetry, some kind of rules are also to be observed, and if we just depend on the imagery or the natural inspiration, we may not be possibly feeling comfortable. But in the end of the poem, the poet himself answers that image or inspiration should be given preference, and later on that some kind of craft or some kind of technique may be involving into that. The poem is rich with imagery. For example, first of all, the most beautiful image is that of the gul mohar plant, which glows automatically among the shisham tree. That makes the poem look beautiful as the nature is being done in that way. Same is the case with another example given, that of the woman, when he says that illogically, sometime intensely and illogically, he would proceed like a woman. And in the same way, if we go down in the poem, we can find another beautiful image, and that is of making a building, that is brick after brick image has been given. And then ultimately the poet gives us the example of the contentment, of the kind of satisfaction that one should have if one is doing and writing poetry in an automatic way. So, students, this is the part 7 of the poem reflection. Hope to see you in some next part very soon. So, till that time, see you in the next part. Until that time, hope to see you very happy and satisfied after reading this section of poetry. If this is so, do not fail to hit the subscribe button as well as the like button. Some of the comments I may be responding to as well. Thank you for watching.